VGM Together land. Welcome to Phrase Rhythm in Video Game Music. I'm going to be guiding you through this. My name is DANNYMUSIC. I go by It's DANNYMUSIC on Twitter and DANNYMUSIC just about everywhere else. So a little bit about me. My main involvement in the video game remix community is playing trombone and also arranging with the game brass. I also do have a personal YouTube channel. On the music side of things, I have a bachelor's and a master's degree both in music composition, as well as half of a doctorate from University of Toronto in music composition. This particular topic is something that I got exposed to during my first year of my master's program, and it's not particularly well known, so I'm looking forward to both getting to introduce you to the concept of phrase rhythm in video game music, as well as relating it to the music that we all know and love specifically. So, with that out of the way, I have a listening exercise for you. So, I'm going to play along to two pieces of music, and I would like you to clap along with what you think the beat is. Here goes. Okay, so press 1 if you're doing this. Can the music be louder? Yes. Okay, so this is 1. This is 2. Okay, seeing a lot of 2s. There's a 1. Okay, interesting. Alright, next piece, you ready? Okay, this is 1. This is 2. So again, 1, 2. And press 3 if you're doing something else. There can be potential other third options. If you're doing like... Three! Okay, I'm seeing the 3. That's interesting. 3, 1.5. Okay. So I'm gonna stop playing this... Actually, no. I'm gonna continue playing this music and we'll put it on a lower volume for a little bit. So... I hope you enjoyed this clapping exercise. There's not necessarily a wrong or a right answer to this, but this is introducing you to the concept of hypermeter. Hypermeter is grouping pulses into larger durations. The question is, what is a pulse? Well, the pulses were what you guys were just clapping, whether it be the... or... Those are both kinds of pulses. So if you're doing one of those, then you're clapping along with the hypermeter. There is a specific kind of pulse, which is called the beat. So the relationship between the beat and the beat is what's seen as the fundamental pulse, and the beat is what gets noted down on sheet music. So in this case, when Gregory Arose transcribed this piece of music, he notated this 1 he notated that as the beat specifically. But even though he notated that as the beat specifically, there are still other kinds of pulses. So one thing to notice with the beats is the beats can be divided into strong beats and weak beats. The strong beats are always 1 and 3, and the weak ones are 2 and 4. So 1 and 3 always have a little bit more accent compared to 2 and 4 on the beat. But this extends to the pulse layer as well. So if you're doing... Even with the hypermeter, even with the extra layer on top of that, 1 and 3 are still more heavily accented than 2 and 4. And if you're thinking of it on the mensural level, then the same thing happens as well. So bum 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 ba da 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 da, or ba 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 da. There's like a natural ebb and flow that comes from alternating strong beats and weak beats. Similarly, with just about any pulse in music, even the greater, the more high-level pulses, there are still strong beats and weak beats. So hypermeter is all about recognizing those alternating patterns. So the concept of hypermeter is 1/2 of phrase rhythm. The other half is phrase structure. So the question is, what is a phrase? Oftentimes, like, musicians talk about phrases, but there's really not that much of a consistent definition. If you're trying to explain it in words, it can honestly be a very hard thing to do. The main source that I was pulling this information from has a very concise definition of a phrase. The phrase is a constant movement toward a goal, the cadence, which is by Roger Sessions. So each of these words is pretty important. Movement, so we're progressing towards something, and that goal is the cadence. Well, then the next question is, what is a cadence? The cadence is kind of a resolution for a phrase. If you think of like earlier music theory classes, you may have heard of different kinds of cadences, such as authentic cadences, half cadences, plagal cadences, Phrygian half cadences, things like that. Those kinds of terminology apply largely to music that we find in the classical through Romantic era, but with video game music, we need a less precise definition because there are a lot of cadences that don't neatly fall into those windows. For example, the chord progression flat 6, flat 7, 1 is a super well-known cadence in video game music. It's the Final Fantasy victory theme. Ba 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 ba. It's in the Mario victory theme. Ba 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 bum ba 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 bum ba 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 ba. But that's not a cadence that has a nice, convenient name for it. So we need a better descriptor for what a cadence does than just the specific kinds that are involved. So the overall effect of cadences is that they provide some sort of resolution, some sort of closure to the phrase, and maybe that's an invitation to continue on and listen more to the music, or maybe it's an invitation to take a breather. If you compare it to like sentence structure, the cadence could be a period or it could be a comma, but either way, it's some kind of punctuation mark. So with this example with Treasure Town, ba ba da bum 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 ba bum ba da ba ba dum bum ba 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 da ba ba da bum 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 ba bum ba da 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 da. And you notice that I was breathing there. Usually, if this is not a hard and fast rule, but I like to liken it to breathing because breathing is a way of taking a pause. If you were imagining being a musician and actually playing this passage, then the long notes would be when you would take a breath in order to get ready for the rest of what you have to say. So that's just a little bit of phrase structure. We've talked about phrase structure and we've talked about hypermeter. So when you put the two of them together, that's phrase rhythm. phrase rhythm is a way of describing the interaction of phrase structure with hypermeter. And here you can see the two graphs overlaid on top of each other. I didn't really talk about the graphs specifically, but the 1, 2, 3, 4 in red are the beats, and then each of the purple and blue layers are like the hyperbeats that could be on top of that. And then with the phrase structure, the yellow is one phrase, the orange is another phrase, and then I highlighted the cadences specifically in this greenish color. So you notice that with this particular piece, with Treasure Town, the phrases and the hypermeter are very well aligned, and they fit a very neat pattern. There are two phrases, each of them is 4 measures. With the exception of this pickup measure, then they pretty much follow a consistent pattern. The cadence is always in 3, the third measure, and goes to 4. Similarly, 1, 2, cadence here, goes to 4. This is a relatively regular phrase structure, and that is common to a lot of music, both video game and not. So the interesting part is that, whoops, I accidentally moved my slides. The interesting part is that phrase structure and hypermeter don't necessarily agree. So I'm going to be spending a lot of the rest of this panel talking about examples that don't agree. So let's go to some issues with phrase rhythm. I say issues, some situations in phrase rhythm where the phrase structure and the hypermeter do not agree. So the first is external expansion. External expansion is when there is additional musical material that interrupts the phrase rhythm structure that is outside of a phrase itself. And as an example of that, I'm going to play this piece from Kirby's Return to Dreamland, and I'm going to talk over top of it and try to illustrate the kinds of things that I mean. So here we go. Whoops, let's start from the beginning. One, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So what I was just counting there is the hypermeter at the measure level. But you notice that before I started counting, you have like this little bit of extra material before the melody comes in. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Break. 1, 2. So those little breaks that you have between the two phrases, that's external expansion. Prefixes is when this introduces a phrase. So you have like a little bit of an intro that sets up the tonal area, sets up the rhythmic pattern, the ba 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 da ba da ba ba. That's a prefix, and the prefixes in this case happen before each of those phrases that we listen to. So now let's go on and listen to what comes next. You notice that there's no prefix leading into this next phrase. It goes right into a melody. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we're in some kind of like big chord build-up section. And then back to the intro again, back to the looping point. So what is that big long building section? With this subject in particular, there's a lot of subjectivity involved. Is it a phrase? Is it not a phrase? Personally, I am inclined to believe it is not a phrase because of the definition that we're using. A phrase is a constant movement towards a goal. in this case, one single chord, one single buildup isn't necessarily a goal. It's not movement. It's just sitting there. It's making it bigger and sounding larger, but it's not moving anywhere. It's just accumulating additional layers. So instead of calling it a prefix, I would say that the main focus is to lead away from the material that just preceded it. I would call that a suffix. So to be clear what I'm talking about, it's here. So we have this phrase, 3, 4, suffix. There's also a question of how do you know if it's a prefix or if it's a suffix, and I would say to that it depends on whether the material introduces the phrase that's about to come, or if it provides some sort of closure to the phrase that just happened. If it introduces the material, then it's a prefix. If it provides some kind of closure to the phrase that just happened, it's more of a suffix. So prefixes and suffixes are everywhere in music, everywhere, especially in video game music. Let's talk about something else. So another kind of external expansion is successive downbeats. Successive downbeats happen when you have two strong hypermetric pulses in a row. So an example of this is Inside the Castle Walls from Super Mario 64, which I'll play now. And you notice on this bit of sheet music from VG Lead Sheets, I underlined underneath the hypermeter pulses. In this case, I'm looking at the hypermeter that is 2 measures at a time. Ignore the first ending. What I'm really interested in talking about is the second. So here we go, listen through. 2. 3. 4. Going back to the first ending. 1. 2. 3. 4. 1. 1. So in that case, we had 2 strong hypermetric pulses in a row, and that's what caused successive downbeats there. 2 ones in a row is successive downbeats. And I've listed a couple other examples here. I'm not going to talk about the other examples specifically, but if you're interested in this topic and want to follow along and want to see the kinds of things, how you can relate it to the music that you listen to, then I recommend checking out these examples as a place to start. And also I will be available in the panels chat, and you can feel free to DM me on Twitter or Discord or wherever, because I'm always happy to talk about this subject. Yeah, I'll say as well that another situation where this occurs very often is when there is a pickup measure to the second phrase. So you notice there's a pickup measure here, and that's the case with Gusty Garden Galaxy as well. It's not always the case that you'll have a pickup measure in the second phrase in order to have successive downbeats, but that is a situation that often happens. And then the last kind of external expansion that I would like to talk about, which is not really as much of an expansion as it is a contraction, it is called elision. So just like elision, when you think of wordplay, elision is when you glide notes and you glide sounds together in order to sound extra smoother. In elision in phrase rhythm, it is when there is overlap. I've actually also seen it called phrase overlap between one phrase and the next phrase. The 4 of one of the first phrase becomes the 1 of the second phrase. And the example that I have here is Home Goldove, which I will play now. And I'm actually going to play this from the beginning because I would like to introduce how it goes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we get a little bit of a suffix or a prefix to introduce the next one. 1, 2, 3, 4, Now listen what happens here. Well, repeat. 3, 4. Now listen to what happens here. 1, 2, 3, 4. But it's a new section. So when 4 becomes 1 in that kind of situation, that's essentially what elision is. You have a bit of overlap between the two phrases. So I'm seeing the question in chat, how does one know if it's 1 or 4? That has to do with the hypermetric structure. Think of where the strong beats are. Think of where the strong pulses are in order to figure out where it is. So at the very beginning of the phrase, you'll get a 1, and then when the phrase is about to close, then that's when the 4s happen. It has to do with how you feel and how you interpret the music. And again, a lot of this stuff with this particular topic is very subjective and very up to interpretation. Even just like the definitions of phrases and cadences, as I've illustrated, are very subjective and very up to interpretation. So this is how I interpret it, and it may not necessarily be how you do, but I hope you can learn a lot from the topics. And again, feel free to check out the other examples. So we've talked about external expansion. External expansion, again, being where the additional material that throws off phrase rhythm occurs outside of a phrase. So now let's talk about internal expansion. So with these, now that you're kind of getting a little bit of a gist on how to feel the hypermeter and how to count along, I'm going to leave this to you all first. So I'm going to play the example, which is the athletic theme from Super Mario Bros. 3, and I'm going to ask you the question, how many phrases and how long is each phrase? And I will show you my diagram of the situation right after this. Okay, I'm just looking at the first half. I'll play it again. I'll take a drink. Okay. So, here's how I interpret it. Here's my diagram of the phrases. So you notice we have a prefix at the very beginning, the prefix being the very intro. The ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Like I said, that is very common to have, especially in video game music, where there's a little bit of a sequence that kind of sets the mood. Then the phrases, I've outlined the first one in yellow and the second one in orange. So if you listed 2 phrases, then that's the answer that I got. But you notice with the second one, with the second phrase, you see that it isn't quite 4 measures. It doesn't fit the 4-measure pattern exactly. So the first one fits the 4-measure pattern. 1, 2, 3, 4. The cadences end on the 4. But the second one, you have 5 measures. 1, 2, 3, more 3, 4, 1. I'll play it again. Yeah. You have a little bit of an extra bar there, and that is internal phrase expansion. In this case, it happened by repetition. It doesn't necessarily have to be exact repetition. In this case, it wasn't exact repetition. It was the sequence. Yeah, even with the 5-4 measure, the 5-4 measure doesn't actually have much to do with the expansion itself. The 5-4 measure basically sets off the end of the cadence. That's your strong beat that is the conclusion of the phrase. But what I'm talking about is more the interior of the phrase. You notice that it throws the template off a little bit. So the way that I labeled it was 3 and then 3 repeating because of the repetition involved, then 4 and then 1. Like I said, this can be an exact repetition or it can be a sequence, as in this case, and it also threw off where the cadence is accented. So here it happened such that the cadence was on 4, but here the cadence is on a 1. G7 to C is an authentic cadence, which is a very strong harmony. Expansion through repetition is very common, especially in video game music, and again, I invite you to check out some of the other examples, and you can see other cases of both of those situations. Okay, so next one that I have to talk about, I'm going to ask you the same question. It's the overworld from the Legend of Zelda theme, and once again, I'm asking how many phrases and how long is each phrase? Also, this is the link to the past version because I'm biased. Okay, I'm gonna let it play one more time. Okay, so here's what I have, and again, this may or may not be the same as what you have. There's a lot of subjectivity that comes with this topic. So we have a prefix at the beginning, which again is common with a lot of video game music. The melody hasn't really started yet, but that prefix sets the tone. And once again, with the hypermeter, I'm looking at 2-bar phrases at a time. So, bum ba 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 la la. That's 1. Ba 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 bum ba 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 bum ba ba. 2. Ba ba da da ba 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 ba. 3. Ba da 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 da. 4. And there is a cadence on 4. The F7 is a dominant harmony, which goes to the B flat, which is a tonic harmony for an authentic cadence there. So that's the first set of the phrase. 1, 2, 3, 4 seems pretty normal. But then when it gets to the second part, listen to what happens. I'll play just the second phrase again. Hopefully this is just the second phrase. Yeah. What's all this, then? So, what's all this, then? This is a parenthetical insertion. A parenthetical insertion is an additional musical material that is non-essential to the phrase structure. In this case, you're just kind of like sitting on that dominant harmony and embellishing it just a little bit more, which provides just a little bit more interest and provides just a little bit more tension leading into the next part of the phrase. So with the parenthetical insertion, just like how parentheses work in sentence structure, not to be confused with mathematical structure, in linguistics, in sentence structure, if you take out the parentheses, then the sentence should still make sense. And if you can imagine what it would sound like with the stuff in parentheses removed, then you should still be able to make sense of the melody. Bum 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 ba da dum bum ba 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 bum ba dum bum ba dum ba dum bum ba da ba da dum bum ba da dum ba da dum ba da dum. There I just sang what it would sound like with the parentheses removed, and it's not quite the same, but it still works musically, right? And that's the case for all these other examples as well. And if you don't believe that this is a parenthetical insertion in the Legend of Zelda overworld, let me show you the version of the main theme that happens in the very next game, Link's Awakening, and you'll notice something different that happens here. So once again, you have a prefix. The prefix is slightly different in this case. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you notice what happened there? They removed the part that was the parenthetical insertion. This one is just straight 1, 2, 3, 4, relatively ordinary phrase structure. But in Link's Awakening, by this point, we've heard the main theme for 3 Zelda games. So the removal of the part that makes this unique actually made the Link's Awakening version of the theme unique. So yeah, that's parenthetical insertion. And you can also find a lot of examples in this throughout music and video game music especially. I invite you to check the other ones that are listed. I also have been thinking about Legend of Zelda music a lot, largely because of what I'm doing with the Game Press right now. So hope you enjoy that one as much as I did. Okay. So I have one more example of internal expansion to talk about, and this is Green Greens from Kirby's Dream Land. Once again, I would like to ask you, how many phrases and how long is each phrase? I'm also using the Superstar Ultra version because it's nice. Okay, and that's just the first half. I'll play just the first half again. Okay. So, once again, 2 phrases. We have a prefix that introduces the first one, ba-ba-da, but in this case, it's a bit of a trick question. Sometimes the internal expansion can it's actually a 5-measure phrase. It's not really expansion through repetition. It's not really a parenthetical insertion. Sometimes it can just be a 5-measure phrase. So we can see this. The very first one, once again, is relatively normal. Ba 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 da 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 da. And you notice you have a cadence going from the third bar into the fourth. Then the second one starts. Ba ba da ba ba da 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 da. But it's not a cadence this time. Look at what happened with the harmony. The harmony goes from E7 to A minor, G. We're in the key of C major now. It's not really as much of a cadence to be hitting the relative minor instead of the major key. But it resolves itself right away. ba ba da ba 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 da. So in this situation, it's actually a 5-measure phrase, and I'll play it again. Going to the second one now. So how do we know it's not a parenthetical insertion? Well, the main reason why I would argue is because we've heard the exact same material before. If the exact same material was structural, if it was integral to the first phrase, it stands to reason that it would be structural and integral to the second phrase as well. So you can't really remove anything from this one. If you take a look at the harmonies here, in bar 3, you do have D minor 7 to E major 7, or E dominant 7, going to F. It would kind of work. That would be like a weird, but it would be like a weird progression in order for that to happen. Instead, you need all of the additional harmonies in order to make sense of how the theme progresses. Similarly, it's not expansion through repetition just because there isn't anything that repeats. So in this situation, it is actually a 5-measure phrase. And you notice that with the cadences, the first one went from 3 going into 4, but this one goes from 5 going into 1, and then we have a little bit of a suffix that happens afterward, where the that material continues. That material, again, is more connected to the previous material than it is the following material, so that's why I would call that a suffix rather than a prefix. So yeah. That's a bit of green greens for you, and that is the last example that I have to talk about. So I'm going to open this up to questions, but first I would like to say a conclusion. Why does this matter? Why would we focus on phrase rhythms? Introducing irregularities in phrase rhythm is one way of creating interest in a melody that doesn't involve complex chords. You notice that throughout the course of this panel, I haven't really talked about harmony that much. I've talked about it in the context of cadences, and I've talked in the context of like dominant and tonic chords, but getting an understanding of this subject in particular is much more about how you listen and how you interpret the material than it is about being able to know, understand, and label chords. There's an example in, what's the name of the song? I can't think of the name of the song right now. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking. But I wish I had chords in an order that was new as like a way of creating creative material. But that's not the only way of creating creative material. Introducing irregularities in phrase rhythm is one way of doing that. And you notice that the majority of the examples that I picked for this demonstration and the majority of the ones that I listed as other examples to look for, a lot of them are not obscure. A lot of them are some of the most beloved and well-known tunes that have endured through a lot of video game music history. So this is relevant when it comes to creating memorable melodies. And part of that also has to do with the idea of managing listeners' expectations. Another thing that you'll notice with a lot of these examples, we had the first phrase in each example be relatively normal, straight 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the weird stuff happens during the second one, or the weird stuff happens between the first one and the second one. And that's kind of by design. I often think of it, it's like have you ever had a really good pianist play Happy Birthday to You at a party? There are essentially 3 things that you can do with it. If you go straight, happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday, dear whoever, happy birthday to you, it's fine, right? It's just a normal piece, normal phrase rhythm, did exactly what you wanted it to, did exactly what you thought it was going to do, and makes it happen. If you do something like, happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday, dear whoever, I'm going to crush your bones into dust. That's a surprise. But it comes out of nowhere. it's not exactly satisfying as much as it's an eyebrow raising thing. It's like, did you just say that? Did you just do the thing? However, what phrase rhythm does is it still gives the listener what they want, but not quite in the way that they expect. Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday to whoever, happy birthday to you. It still works, and it can be very satisfying to hear the gratification from getting the resolution that you want, but delayed and not quite how you expect it to occur. And that matters a lot for both writing music as well as when you listen to and interpret music. So, yeah, there we go. That is all of the explicit stuff that I have prepared for this, so I'll take some questions from the chat now. Notice had a question. Oh, Noj did not have a question? Anyway. Oh, sorry you missed the beginning of this panel. Apologies if it was already covered. Thoughts on the connection to harmonic sentence structure in classical music? Thinking of the repetition and fragmentation that happens in the first and second phrases rather than the first. Yeah. I think there's an interesting parallel to be made when it comes to sentence structure as well. Oftentimes, just like general good writing advice is to vary your sentence beginnings and make sure that you don't have too many of the same types of sentences in a row. If all you're doing is writing simple sentences without any independent or dependent clauses to mix things up, then your writing will seem relatively stagnant. However, introducing extra wrinkles, introducing external expansion or internal expansion in this situation can provide a lot of interest to your writing there. So yeah, I think the comparison with English grammatical sentence structure is a totally fair and appropriate one. Yeah, and for my last page, which I just accidentally ended my presentation, I'll bring that back up again. I would like to show you the resources that I used when creating this material, so that if you're interested in learning more about this, then here are some things that you can potentially check out. So the main source that I'm using of information here is a book called Phrase Rhythm and Tonal Music by William Rothstein. His writing I find pretty accessible. It connects a lot with Schenkerian analysis, which can be a little more esoteric, but a lot of his diagrams and a lot of his examples are labeled similarly to how I have labeled mine, with the 1, 2, 3, 4, mapping out the hypermetric structure, and that works. I also used a generative theory of tonal music, which is kind of like what William Rothstein's work is based on. That's sort of the forebear to that. And then phrase rhythm as form in classical instrumental music describes a lot of the cadences that you hear. In phrase rhythm specifically, there's often a distinction between accented cadences versus unaccented cadences. Accented cadences are ones where the resolution happens on a strong beat, so generally that would be 4 going into 1, versus unaccented cadences, which would be more 3 going into 4. So bum 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 ba bum ba da ba ba dum bum ba 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 da. That's 3 going into 4. Ba ba dum bum 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 ba 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 da ba ba da ba 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 da. Once again, 3 going into 4. So those would be unaccented cadences. And yeah, here are my links as well. My Twitter is It's Danny Music. I stream things on Twitch, mostly linked to the Past Randomizer, but occasionally music as well. On twitch.tv/DannyMusic, I have a personal YouTube channel, and most of my musical involvement is with the game brass. Right now, we're working on a lot of Zelda music, so that's why the Zelda piece is particularly near and dear to my heart. Yeah. So since we have a bit of time, feel free to ask any other questions, and I'd be happy to cover them. I'll actually cover one of the examples that I did not explicitly talk about. I remember reading something vague about parenthetical insertion earlier. So let me pull up 2 a.m. from Animal Crossing Wild World, and I'll talk about that and why I think that that is a parenthetical insertion. This is one of the nicest, cleanest sounds that I like. So we have a bit of a prefix here introducing the phrase. Two. Three. Four. So that's the first phrase. Not too many surprises here. Let's go with the second one and we'll see what happens. 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. And then that's the cadence. It kind of aligns with the beginning prefix of the piece. So in a way, that's kind of an elision. I would not qualify an elision quite the same as I would with the external expansion examples that I have, just because it's a phrase eliding into a prefix and not a phrase eliding into another phrase. But if you notice here, one, two. Oh, actually, it's a little bit farther back. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. A little pause. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, and we're back. So you notice there was an extra bar of one particular chord. It doesn't really need to be there. It just sets up the second half of the phrase. If you were to take it out, then it would be fine. The bar doesn't have any melodical material, any melodic material. So in this case, I would classify that as a parenthetical insertion. So I hope that clarifies a little bit more what that is. Weasel King, one question. How prominent do you think these forms of expansion are in music that does have the space for larger chords and instruments? Do you think that they're still very important to consider, or more of an either-or type situation? I think that having musical space for larger chords and instruments versus phrase rhythm, I think that those are independently correlated, or uncorrelated in this case. There's definitely room to have both. A bigger challenge when it comes to having more elaborately orchestrated textures is it takes larger ensembles more time to breathe. It takes the listener a bit more time to process what is going on with a larger ensemble. And also, if you're thinking of an actual orchestra, then there is a spatial concern of the cellos and the French horn players and the tubas and the clarinets. They're all very far away from each other physically. So having a little bit of extra space is additionally important to those particular instruments. Therefore, I think that it's actually more likely that there will be kinds of external expansion in music that is written for those more elaborate instrumentations. So I hope that sufficiently answers your question. But it's definitely not an either-or type situation, I would say. Do I have any examples of more elaborately orchestrated material? Gusty Garden Galaxy, I'll play that one. This is an example. I have it listed here for successive downbeats. And this is another situation. So like here's a prefix. This is another situation where you have a second phrase that starts with a pickup, and that's what makes it the successive downbeat. You have 2 ones in a row. 3, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. Going back. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a little bit of an interruption there, and yeah, like that's where you get your 2 ones in a row. Ba da 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 ba ba da. Yeah, the example of successive downbeats. Yeah. And once again, I hope you guys appreciate hearing this stuff. Like I said, it's a very subjective material, but now that you know somewhat how to look for it, if you're like me, I started like listening just about anywhere, anytime I would hear something that's not a 4-measure phrase. It's just like, oh my god, what is that? How can I classify it? What's the thing? And just like with all kinds of music theory, phrase rhythm analysis is descriptive rather than prescriptive. This is a way of learning to appreciate and understand more about what has already happened and what has already existed. So even if you're not someone who is actively in a position to write or arrange music, if you're listening for phrase rhythm, it's just another way that you can appreciate the music that we all know and love. Especially when video game music is involved. Exactly. Yeah. I'll go back again to Inside the Castle Walls from Super Mario 64. The second half of this theme is another example of expansion by repetition. Actually, instead of that one... No, I'll do that one. I'll do that one. That's fine. I wasn't expecting to have quite this much time left over, so... This is pretty great. I was worried that I would spend too long. So here's the B half of the theme. Well, once it comes in. 1, 2, 3. 3 repeating. 4, 1, 2, 3. 3 repeating. 1. And then we lead right into the next then we lead right again into the next part of the theme. So once again, you get the exact same sequence of material, and in order to determine if it's an expansion through repetition, rhythm helps a lot with that. rhythm is a very telling thing when it comes to interpreting music, because it's much easier to tell if things are the same rhythm or not. But yeah, that's some more of Inside the Castle Walls for y'all. I need to rewatch this panel sometime. My attention span feels a bit worse because of time zone. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, my attention span, I was not 100% in the headspace to begin this panel after watching the Paper Mario thing go down, which we had worked very hard on. So thank you all for being here and for chilling out and getting to hear some cool phrase rhythm stuff with us. Okay. So I think that I have until 11. So I'll go ahead and... Oh, do I not have until 11? Oh no, I think I do have until 11. Yeah, I'll go ahead and play one more. This is Ulbricht's theme from Octopath Traveler, which is another example of expansion through repetition. Ulbricht the Warrior. So play it through one more time. That was a prefix, and then that was all one phrase. I'll play it again. Whoops, from the beginning though. Yeah. This one as well, you have that rhythmic motif. Ba-da-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. That 2/16 followed by the eighth note. Ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Expansion through repetition. It makes the phrase go on just a little bit longer, and it actually fits pretty well with the character if you think about it, because Ulbricht was a warrior. He had been in a really hard battle. It took a lot out of him personally. It took a lot out of him mentally because of not really the physical pain so much as the mental anguish that he got as part of his character backstory. So just like hearing that theme, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, the phrase expansion there is in service to the character because it evokes that feeling of longing, evokes that feeling of loss, and just persisting on very beleaguered. And then after that's done, then it happens again, but in a new key. So I'll go again. Once again, different key, but the exact same kind of phrase structure. 1, 2, 3, ba da 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 4, 1. And you can tell when the ones are because the cadences in this situation are pretty authentic and they happen in a very classical way. It's a dominant to tonic harmony. Ba da 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 da. 5, 1. And yeah, you can find a lot of this stuff through... You can find a lot of this kind of stuff in Octopath Traveler. Parenthetical insertions as well. And may make the point about parenthetical insertions as well, even though they're not necessarily integral to... I'll let this play a little bit. Even though parenthetical insertions aren't really integral to the phrase structure, they still do enhance the music, and they still do provide function in service of the melodies that you're finding. Phrase rhythm expansions, both externally and internally, are ways of creating interest and variation in a melody. If there's anything that I have to take away is that. So yeah, it's officially 11. That is about all that I have to cover for today, but thank you all so much for watching and hanging out, and I hope you're all looking forward to the rest of VGM Together as much as I am. Alright, bye everyone!